Boys and girls, today I want to ask you, what is the oldest art? Some people might look at the Mona Lisa and think, now that is a really old piece of art. But is there art older than the Mona Lisa? You might look at some of the art from ancient Egypt and think, now that's some pretty old art. Is that the oldest art? Well, believe it or not, some of the oldest art that's ever been made has been found in caves. And I'm going to tell you the story of one cave now. So, boys and girls, I want to tell you the story of how this really, really old art was discovered in a cave. It actually took place in the country of France. Some of you may know a famous city in France, or maybe a famous place to go in France. If you said the Eiffel Tower or Paris, you are right on. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And in France, you may not know this, but there are a lot of caves. There are also a lot of caves in Spain. But for our story today, we're talking about France. And in 1940, there were some boys, and they were out with their dog. And the dog's name was Robot. The dog was not a robot. His name was Robot. Stick with me. Now, they went for a walk. They were out in the woods, and they would throw a stick, and Robot would go and get it, and he'd get it, he'd come back, and good boy, good boy, good boy. And then they would take the stick, and they would throw it again, and Robot, off he goes, and then he would come back, and they'd go, good boy, you gave us. So they threw it again, they threw it so hard, and this time, Robot ran off to get it, and then he didn't come back. So they were like, what's going on? Robot, where are you? Come on, boy. So they start looking all over the place. They're looking for Robot, and they can't find him. So they start walking through the woods, looking, Robot, come here, boy. And all of a sudden, they hear a sound coming out of, it seems like, the ground. And they go, Robot? And they hear, roof, coming back at them from out of the ground. And they're like, how could Robot be under the ground? So they came and they found this huge hole. And when they put their head down into the hole and they said, Robot, whoo, they heard that dog bark back. They thought, oh no, this can't be good. So they went down into that hole. Would you have done that? They went down into the hole and they found a tunnel. And they started to go down the tunnel. It was getting darker and darker and darker. And when they got down there, they could see that it opened up into a cave. Now, one of the boys had known about caves like this before. A teacher of his had told them that a long, long time ago, there were people who lived in that area that now was called France. Back then it wasn't, it was just land. And these people lived in the caves, and they would draw really beautiful pictures on the walls, but that people had found them and had like written their name all over it and ruined it. And he said it was kind of a bummer because that was like really, really old ancient artwork that was in those caves. So anyway, the boys go into the cave. That one of them had a lighter. They light it up and they look around. They're like, whoa, this is like one of the caves that our teacher was telling us about. But sure enough, I can see drawings, but I can also see where people wrote their names all around it. Oh, so rude. But when they looked around, they were like, where's Robot? We're in the cave, but I don't see him. Robot! Roof! Way off from out on the other side of the cave, they could hear him. So they're like, where is he? All of a sudden, towards the top of the cave, they see this hole. And they're like, oh man, did Robot go through that hole? So of course, rather than going home and getting help, they weren't going to leave their dog there. They went up and they went through the hole, and it was pitch dark, like so dark they couldn't see at all. They helped each other through the hole. They go climb down, and now they realize, they realize they are now in a really big cave. They take out their lighter. They whoosh, light it up. What? Are you kidding me? Look at that! Well, my friends, let me tell you, they had found the biggest cave ever to be discovered by human beings, filled with perfect art from long ago. These people who made it thousands and thousands of years ago had left for some reason. And since then, no one had been in that cave. They'd been in the first little part where they went, but it was Robot who figured out that if you went through the little hole, you would go into the rest of it, and it was like mind-blowing. They went back to the school. They got the teacher who had originally told them about these caves. The teacher came with them along with another man who he knew was an expert in ancient art, and people went crazy. I'm going to show you some pictures right now. So boys and girls, the story I just told you, here is a real photograph, because kids always think I'm lying, which I'm not. Here are two of the boys. Here is the professor. And here is the artist friend of theirs that they called over to come help them. And here's a picture of Robot, the dog. I told you Robot was not a robot. Robot is a dog. And amazing, they all went inside there and they were able to see the real paintings in this cave, and they were astounded at what was there. When people found out, it hit the newspapers and people went nuts to read that here it was, 1940, and some boys and a dog had found some of the oldest art ever found in real life. And so people started to come and to see it and enjoy it, which is really, really awesome. Now here's a map showing you where Robot first went in and where they first went into the cave. And then this is the Hall of the Bulls. This is where it was a really big opening in the cave where you saw a lot of bulls. That's why it's called that. And then you can just see how this cave goes on and on and on and on and on. It was gigantic. Now, I obviously can't bring you to the Lascaux cave that those boys found, but this is kind of a cool website where it takes you on a virtual tour where you can pretend that you're in the cave and that you're walking through it. I love this. This is that hall that those boys first came in, the Hall of the Bulls, and it's because there's a whole bunch of bulls, these animals that are on the ceiling there. And then I love how this website just allows you to just keep virtually walking through the cave. And it's so well lit. I want you to imagine this instead, that you're walking through there with just a little bit of a flame from a lighter going through there. And of course, now they've made nice paths, nice sidewalks, or not sidewalks, but paths that you can see there of concrete. But back then it would have been rubble and, where they had to crawl through tight spaces to get to the next space. And maybe it was wet and maybe it was drippy and maybe it smelled a little bit. And then, and then you got Robot going in through there a million miles an hour. I mean, just a lot of fun to think about what that was like for those boys to find. I know my brothers and I, we used to always wish that we would find something old when we would go camping or when we would go exploring. It just is thrilling to me to even think about those boys finding this and being able to go through the whole thing. But then also to know that what they found was so important and that we would be talking about it even today. And when you look at the pictures of what was in there, right away, people had all these questions like, who drew it? And how old was it? And where did they get their art supplies? And how did they get up so high? And who gave a light? Was there like a kid who held a torch while everyone else was working? And what were they drawing things they saw in real life? Or were they doing it out of their imagination? Did it tell a story? Was it real? Was it imaginary? And how long did it take them? And did only certain people get to draw the paintings? Just tons of questions. They found handprints. And if you look at this carefully, you're going to see that you can see the rock wall here. and then there's paint around it. They figured out that the way they did it was that they would start with the wall, but that someone would put their hand up on the wall, and then they would spit paint onto their hand in the wall. And so then when they took their hand away, it would end up looking like that. So cool. Now don't say ew, just say, interesting. Because they didn't have spray bottles back then. So they came up with their own way of doing it. Here's this is not in the Lascaux cave, but this is another cave where you can just see so many handprints. It just makes my mind go crazy to think how many people were there and how did they get all those different colors and what did those hands look like of those people? What was the color of their skin in real life? Awesome. So here's someone studying the art in the cave. You can't go in there now. There's only people who are archaeologists who are studying who can go in there. And in some of the caves, there are even pictures of woolly mammoth. And like we saw in our cave, there's birds and bears and rhinoceros and people. And this lady even finds, she searches for pictures that we don't know what they mean. Let me show you. She notices in these caves that there will be little dots or squares. And actually, I should show you. This is her right here, squeezed in this tiny, tiny little space. She goes into any new cave that hasn't been evaluated yet, and she doesn't worry about the animals. She's like, yeah, sure, it's a horse, or it's a bull, or it's a rhinoceros, or it's a woolly mammoth. She wants to look at all the spots and dots and circles and X marks. And she's like, I just want to write down every little shape that I see and start to imagine, why would they make circles like that? Is it supposed to be a path or a map or the moon? And so she has made this chart. These are all shapes and symbols that she's found where they're not letters of an alphabet. And obviously we can say, oh, that's a hashtag and oh, that's a heart. Really? 17,000 years ago, you really think they had that? No! We have to figure out now when we look at that, what did it mean to them back then? We don't know. You literally get to try and make it up. Now, some people say, what did they use for the art? Well, this is a rock called ochre. You can see it right here. And then this is what it looks like when it's been ground up. And they would take this ground up ochre, and the ochre was in kind of different colors, but when you look at it, you're going to be like, oh, that is the colors of the stuff that they were painting, those are the colors on the wall. They would take that rock and grind it up, add water, and they would turn it into paint. And here are they look like black twigs, right? Well, those twigs are actually twigs, but they were put in a very mild fire. And the twigs slowly burned, and then they could use it almost like a marker. Believe it or not, I have these same types of twigs for you to use today. They're called twig or vine charcoal, and you're going to get to use it on your own. I'm going to be telling you now how we're going to be doing our project. All right, so for us to do our cave painting, you're going to need a brown piece of paper, an idea sheet, a symbol sheet, and your tray of supplies. So let me take these one at a time. Your little tray is going to have a black twig charcoal, a white pastel, and a black oil pastel. The twig charcoal is really awesome, but because it really is charcoal out of a fire, it sometimes gets crumbly. So if you're like, I like the experience of feeling like I'm using a real art supply from long ago, but if you prefer to use a black oil pastel, then just knock yourself out and do that. The next is your idea sheet. Then we have the chart with all of the symbols or the shapes, and then you have your brown paper. The first thing you're going to do is crumple that brown paper up like you mean it. I don't want you to stomp on it, but I do want you to crumble it really good. And then you're going to take your hands and smooth it out. You don't want it to take forever because I want you to get to work. The next thing you're going to do is use the flat part of the pastel to bring out the texture of the crumples. You're not drawing with the point of it, you're using the flat part without even making powder to get that texture. Next, you're going to be taking your idea sheet, choosing a shape of a replica of one of the actual cave paintings, and I'd like for you to try and draw it. Now, the first thing I always hear is, oh no, I messed up, it's too hard, I can't do it. Come on. If you look at these old cave paintings, it's obvious sometimes they messed up too. And their artwork is not super realistic. So there really is no messing up in this. This one's hardly even finished. So when you start, I don't want to hear, oh, I messed up. I just want you to hear, oh, it looks so much like a cave painting. And you're right. Now, you're going to be taking one part of the animal at a time, referring back to the idea sheet, and then looking down at your paper and taking it one animal at a time. Some kids say, can I make up my own animal? Can I do my own thing? For right now, I'm going to say no, because unfortunately, I'm getting a lot of things that look like cartoon kitty cats or people with big smiles and eyeballs that look like emojis. That is not what cave painting looks like. Cave painting almost is kind of nice because they look very blobby sometimes, and yet it ends up being something that you can tell is an animal or a shape of a person. And I don't want to deny you the opportunity to try and draw and end up with something that really does look like something you would have seen in a cave painting. You do want to be careful not to try and smear your charcoal as you're working. Now, some of you really like the idea of the handprint. If you like, you can take your charcoal twig and you can trace your hand and then just use that white oil pastel or white chalk pastel to go around the outside edge just so that it kind of stands out on your paper. And it's going to look really, really cool. All of these items are kind of here, there, and everywhere, not really in any kind of order, or they're not lined up all perfect. But what I love is that in the spaces that are left in between after you draw your animals, you can start to add some of those symbols or those shapes that we still don't know what they mean, but I'd love for you to put them on your paper because, again, it just gives the look of a real cave painting. Now, what some kids have been enjoying doing is imagining what could those symbols have meant. What do you think they could have meant? And if you come up with your own kind of meaning, could it be that on your cave painting there would be some sort of story that you're telling? Now, we don't want it to be too obvious. We don't want it to be that in 2,000 years, if anyone finds your drawing, that they're going to say, oh, I know what this is. You want them to try and imagine a little bit too. So you're just going to be enjoying the process of pretending that you lived long, long ago, that you had taken a twig, put it in a fire, and gotten a piece of charcoal, and that you, after observing animals outside or observing friends of yours outside, came into the cave and started to draw on the walls. Because that's actually what happened. And I would love for you to have the opportunity to do that. Next week when we get together, I'm going to be giving you ochre, which is that colored rock that they would use to add yellows and oranges. And I'm also going to be giving you different colors of pastels. We're going to be doing a ridiculous amount of cool things to your art next week. But for this week, I just want you to get your cave wall done and for you to draw in animals. Now, before I have you go get your supplies, I want to look at a little bit of art that other kids have made and just show you some examples of what kids have done and to try and be able to tell you some things that I'd like for you to not do. So these examples, you can see that kids have drawn on there. Some of them are a little bit light. They could maybe draw it a little bit darker. But here's what I don't want. I don't want you to just do your hand and then no animals. But this person has space to add animals later. And I don't want you to make up your own faces, where we end up with things that look like kitty cats or faces with eyes and a mouth. And I don't want you to make people that look kind of like modern cartoons. I'd like for you to really look at the idea sheet and try and fill up your paper. But remember, I want you to have at least 3 or 4 animals like you see here, and I want you to use up every little bit of space. Let's try and do that together.